Hey guys, welcome to the channel. It's me, Aura. In today's video, we're going to be going over a 16 Necrotic Wake that myself and Stitch T from Calamity did yesterday. It was timed, but it's not the most flawless of runs, let's put it that way. And once you watch the video, you'll see why. Now, the reason I'm going to go over this is for both your benefit and mine, yours hopefully, so that you can see how I play, we can go over what my decision making is and how I play and how I've got Keystone Master now as a Retribution Paladin in this, what is now the third week of the season being released. I actually got KSM last week, but didn't make a big announcement of it. But for myself, the benefit of going through these and giving you guys a commentary will be I will be able to assess my own gameplay and make improvements as we fine-tune hopefully over the coming weeks remaining of the season. And I also plan on doing this from a raid setting as well on a boss-by-boss basis. But that will take a little bit more work because I plan on going into the log side of things as well. So, without any further delay on my part with the intro, let's get into the bones of it. So we'll swap to the main screen, and as you can see, this is just a video recording. My face cam is in a new location, and this is because I wanted to make it a little bit easier for you guys, so you're not constantly like the play button or whatever else is in front of me. So without any further delay, let's get into it. So, standard, start of the key. We're currently discussing how we're going to do the first pulls, whether or not we're going for the mallet. I'm making sure that I've got enough materials. At this particular point in time, I actually realized I was running low on sharpening stones, so I was checking to see if I had shaded stones in the hopes that I could somehow make more, because I had enough for one or two more runs after this point. Now you see, Ready Check's gone out. I've got an add-on, I believe it's part of Exodus Ray Tools actually, that basically tells me if I have all my buffs active before a pull, and you can click on those icons to then apply them, which you see I do there, to refresh my whetstone buff. Because, you know, those swords got to be sharp. Now, Stitch was our tank for this particular run, and like all good tanks, he very much likes a pull timer. Now, for a Mythic Plus, these pull timers are ideal because 3-minute cooldowns, such as Druid's Incarn, which I will just go back slightly, you will see our Resto Druid just here, hiding behind the Longboy mount, will actually pop Incarn here right now. There, see? He popped Incarn. Now what that does is that means that as we go into this first pack, he has his 3-minute cooldowns rolling. He has Incarn or Celestial Alignment. And because the key's gone in and it's a new instance, it classes essentially as refreshing the boss pool. So he's got Incarn and Celestial Alignment back already. So you kind of get like a double use out of it. Now, as you can see, the caster wasn't interrupted and pulled into the pack, so Stitch actually pulls it in. Now, one big rotational problem for me is I'm actually running the Execution Sentence build here, and although that goes against what my guide was saying, because we have a Shadow Priest and a Boomy, we discussed as a group that me having slightly more single target for the bosses would become more beneficial. So as a result, I'm actually also running the Divine Resonance Legendary. I'll be doing some work later on over the coming weeks to actually decide where it's better for us to sit, given the majority of comps and design setups where a Retribution Paladin may get into it. Because it may be a case of we actually only get, or we have a higher chance of being brought to parties, if you're in the Pug world, because of the single target funnel damage we can bring, at which point having Tempest of the Lightbringer Legendary, Zeal, and kind of going more for that consistent AoE from pack to pack damage may actually be detrimental for our group finding abilities. So I'll do some more work into that and we will go there. So going on to this next pack, we've made the decision that we want to try and maintain the Fleshcrafter, because the Fleshcrafter can damage the other mobs around him when he throws his cleaver. So my priority target here is Corpse Harvester. You saw I tried to get the Drain Fluids kick, but didn't realise that it was still on cooldown. Thankfully our Druid stepped in and just AoE'd, silenced the mobs. Now, this week's affix is Spiteful, so you can see I'm fixated, and that Spiteful mob really wants to hit me. So, generally, you will try and kite out, but in tight situations like this, we'll go back. See how I got targeted by the cleaver and I tried to get it through the executioner? You can do that. Unfortunately, someone else took the hit, so someone else was stood in the way. But it's fine. We're going. Now, this is where our priority single target damage comes in very, very useful. You'll see there that I just bopped Carnage. Now, Executioner Vareth has an AoE aura that reduces the amount of healing that you receive by 50%, which makes him very, very scary for the healers. However, his debuff is physical. It is a bleed. This means that Bop and Bubble are fantastic for this particular mob. I saved the Shadow Priest from dying by bopping the bleed off him, and then when I was targeted, I bubbled. This then also allowed the rest of the group to just continue pumping, and also allowed the healer to contribute damage. Our Resto Shaman for this pull was able to do 1.8k DPS, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that contributes a lot more beneficial than if I was to say try and pump out an extra 500 DPS by not using mouse over macros to help the group. Now, going back to what I was talking about, the rotational thing, you'll see this little add-on that I've got at the top of my screen. That's Helkily. That's something I'm trying to use to increase my rotational awareness. However, it is primarily set up from a raiding standpoint. For Mythic Plus, I am assessing that I don't really have time to use Execution Sentence effectively. I need to try and get these Corpse Harvesters down because our kicks aren't as coordinated. You have myself and Stitch. We were on Discord at the time. And our Druid, who is a friend of Stitch's from his guild, we were on comms, but that doesn't mean we can always coordinate kicks. Now, as that pack was dying, I was given the command, or basically told, as a Kyrian, to go and repair the Goliath. You'll see that I do this now. The pack is still dying, and they are kiting Spitefuls towards us. We are now trying to minimise the out-of-combat time. Two reasons for this. One, it's a Mythic Plus and you're against the clock. But two, I also have a trinket that gains the most benefit by staying in combat pretty much permanently. So the only time we drop combat really is to give the healer a chance to sit down and drink mana. Now, this is where you'll see the priority single target damage really kick in at the start of this fight. We've got Bloodlust, we've got all the buffs. Stitch is the one that's speared. So Stitch, being our tank and our Brewmaster, used a Javelin. Now, Necrotic Wake is rather well known for its weapons. And they're quite big, so we'll go back slightly and we'll re-look at this. Watch Stitch's damage on the pull, but then watch what happens as a Retribution Paladin. So this is quite a good example of where our damage profile can kick in. So we'll go back slightly. You'll see Stitch is just topping himself up here. He's trying to help the healer. We all get the buff. And Stitch's spear will go in. And there we go. 54k. But then watch where these numbers start climbing. You'll see I've already surpassed him. I'm still going. I've now hit 44k spike at the moment Execution Sentence hit. And I'm still maintaining that 40 during this first ad wave. Now I'm starting to dip. But this is where the Boomy's starting to climb. The Boomy is starting to catch me and even this out. The Shadow Priest is yet to play, essentially. But Shadow Priests have an execute. So, look, I'm still well ahead by about 200k worth of damage during that initial pump. Now we're going through the ads. I'm trying to use Divine Storm. I'm trying to AoE these ads. We're trying to keep the poison area tight during this. Oh, we can see there that one of the ads died ahead of us, so I'm trying to go round. Unfortunately, Z-axis, I was still being hit by the green stuff, as you can see. Now, I'm about to get targeted here, and I communicate with the group, and I try to actually run it onto the poison. Here we go. I'm targeted, I call it, everyone tries to stop, and as a result, we were able to maintain our position in the corner. Took quite a lot of damage on my end. I could probably have lay on hands myself immediately to help, or called for an external cooldown, perhaps, if I was running with a full group. You can see that the ads are becoming a little bit of a problem, so I swap to it and prioritize it. We get that thing geared. Now, bit of miscommunication between Stitch and myself. I thought Stitch was going to the left to come up with us, but Stitch stayed down, primarily because we don't know about the Z-axis bugging the boss if he was to come up there. We don't know quite the boss's limits. Now, things were getting a bit tight here because we were running out of time and Stitch's necrotic stacks were getting high. We hadn't discussed him having a bop cancel aura, because that's something that you can also do as a Retribution Paladin. They changed necrotic stacks from mobs to be a physical debuff, so they can be bopped off. This was to combat the Legion tanking style, where Death Knights reigned supreme during necrotic weeks because it was a magical debuff, and by using AMS, they could fully mitigate its application. Now, Stitch has told me to fix this Goliath as well, and because there were less than 5 minutes between both Goliaths, I still have my first Steward. Bearing in mind, you don't need to worry if it does take more than 5 minutes, because a Steward's duration, and how long it lasts while being out, is the same length as its cooldown, so you can keep spamming them out if you need to. Now, again, here's a situation where I thought that less priority damage and more instant burst was going to be more beneficial in just trying to blow the Necromancer up. And you can see it kind of works. I'm doing more DPS than both Stitch and the Shadow Priest put together at this point. I was pulling 34k, and Stitch, the Shadow Priest, and the Shaman were pulling 15 to 12k with the Druid lagging behind. Now, this particular pull was a bit messy. It wasn't particularly well coordinated because we didn't talk about the kicks. And you see, as a result, our Druid got slapped. The reason for that is the Sorcerer didn't get pulled in. We didn't have a ranged kick on it. Now, I saw the power get destroyed there. Something pulled it out, whether it was a dot or something else. But you will see here, during this, when Stitch goes to power it and I see it instantly break, I try to get that stun out before that cast finishes. So this is where you need a little bit of situational awareness. It can be a little bit hectic, but this is one thing that comes with reviewing your own gameplay. Now, stun there. Now, if I was running a different talent, like Repentance, for instance, I could have used Repentance to kill it. Now, here's a little interesting bit of note. You'll see that, the Marauder will run after Stitch in a moment. Now, I want to highlight something that we discovered. We blew the shield up there. I stun. Right. The Bone Mender is casting Final Bargain. Now, Final Bargain is a really powerful healer. Heal. However, what it also does is it decays the target's health. Watch this. Watch the Marauder's health. The bargain goes through. I don't have a kick or a stun at this point, so Bone Mend also goes through. The Marauder's health has gone back up, but it is decaying massively. So Stitch and I at this point are discussing whether or not in future pulls that mechanic with the Bone Mender can be abused, and whether or not it's worth abusing. The reason for this is because obviously casting Bone Mend is a heal. It is the healer of a pack, and as a result it should realistically be prioritized and killed, or at least kicked. The problem is we're in a situation where we have two very long cooldown kicks, and Stitch and I are trying to alternate our kicks as best as we can. Our Shaman, which should be helping Kick, is doing it infrequently. Partially because they're a pug, and partially because they're also a healer, so their priority is elsewhere. Ideally, having an elemental shaman or an enhanced shaman would be ideal for this. Now, 2 Spiteful Shades, they've been rooted, just do a little bit of damage, because at this point we're also discussing how to skip this pack. Now, because we have a priest in the group, the priest can Mind Soothe, and you'll see him do that right now, and that's the little disorientate animation, which means that you can just comfortably run round, and he will pick up this hammer, and Stitch will pick up that spear. Again, we're discussing weapons at this point and how we're going to use them. Because on a tyrannical week, Surgeon Stitchflesh specifically is kind of the wall of the dungeon. So we're now trying to assess and work out how we're going to do this. Because end of the day, if we wipe on him, we're probably going to fail the key, even though at this point in time we're still doing rather well. And we're on track for a really good time. Now, those 2 Marauders died. They have a shield. I will actually just pause it for a second for newer players that don't really know. Those Skeletal Marauders have an ability where they put a shield on themselves. Now, that shield absorbs so much damage. If you can break that shield in time, it will do a substantial amount of damage to the Marauders, to the point where they often kill themselves as a result of it. So if you see that shield up, you burn it. Now, again, this is a Necromancer pack, and the moment you kill the Necromancer, everything else dies. I don't have Execution Sentence for this. It's got 30 seconds left. I've already gone through all my cooldowns. So this is just maintain rotation, Divine Storm, and do what I can to help. I am still ahead. Now, at the 20% mark, as Stitch and I discussed, I'm already activating the Goliath, trying to minimize our time. That does mean that they were out of my kick and out of my stun, so I wasn't able to assist in preventing additional ad spawns, but that doesn't really matter, because we've now got the Goliath buff while the pack is dying, and we can now run straight to the next pack to maximize the benefit of this Kyrian buff. And you'll see we try to do exactly that in a moment with a rather large pull. Now, my steward is kind of in the way there, so you see me click him to talk to him rather than sorting this out. Now, this is Sogadon, and I believe we also pull the mini skeletons as well. Or no, it would seem not. Not yet anyway, which is fine. So, Stitch is at about half health. He's got 12 stacks of Necrotic, so he obviously changed his mind at this point and thought, no, I will let the Necrotic stacks reset before I pull anything else. Which is a good idea, because Brewmaster monks especially, they're fine with Necrotic up until around 30 stacks. Once they hit 30 stacks, they are unhealable. And that's when they need defensives. They need Treants, they might need a Bop, Vortex, Cap Totem, Snares, anything you've got to help. And there are points during this run where I will Hand of Hindrance, which is the Paladin snare that I have bound to a mouse wheel, and I will then stun the opposite target. I did that relatively early in this dungeon. Now, here you can see it's just mass AoE, mass stuns. I'm kind of holding my cooldowns at this point because a lot of it is just fluff ads, and I know that the next pack is going to be potentially problematic. We need a ranged kick on the sorcerer. No one called it, so I went, but both then, our druid and priest, both simultaneously silenced it. Now, here's a little bit of a positional problem. I was stood in the Marauder. Standing in the Marauder meant that I got hit by his frontal cleave, which was a bit of a problem. There you can see the priority damage. That Marauder went down. Now, I got fixated and got slapped by that Spiteful there because I was a little bit too late in moving away. I thought I could get an extra 1 or 2 hits in on the other target before it fully spawned and manifested. But as a melee, you really need to watch out for those Spitefuls. It's unnecessary damage that you really need to try and avoid. Now, Stitch is fine hovering at that health. One thing that you have to bear in mind is Stagger will never kill a monk. So, if a monk is at 2-3% health and they can just stay away from a mob, they are fine. They're not as fine as you'd like as a healer, but they won't instantly just fall over unless a cast goes off or something of that nature. So, you've just seen I've picked up a spear. So I'm now holding a spear and a mace. And Stitch has told me I am holding those for the third boss. I am using both just on Stitch Flesh. That's how much damage you need to be pumping out to get this guy to go down. And even then, as you'll see shortly, things don't quite go to plan. Again, another Necromancer, same thing. This time, there's 2 casters. You just see their Stitch do a fantastic job of paralyzing the mob that was far out, that was unlikely to be kicked. So, there we go. Just go back just a smidge. There. And there we go. That could also be achieved with a repentance if we weren't running a monk. Or you'd try and coordinate in a full group to get priest silence, to bring it in, and you'd pull it all in, and then you'd solar beam. Again, difference between pugs or pickup groups with randoms and fully coordinated groups. You can alter your CC as a paladin to best help the group. So you then see the silence come in, and I believe we get a beam shortly. I'm doing single target damage on the Necromancer and just going for it. You saw the execution sentence come down. I am holding wings though. This is probably something that I shouldn't have done. I should have popped wings. I think I'm a little bit too scared to dedicate my full 2-minute timers yet. But it is something I am getting used to and practicing. So we've got that. Now we go on to the incinerator. Now, the incinerator has a very nasty fire dot and has a kick that needs to be sorted. Thankfully, given how frequently he does the main cast Inferno, 2 melee DPS can alternate kicks, which is what we try and do. Stitch and I take it. I called for Stitch to take the first, which he did, and then I take the second. And we just alternate between the two. So for a coordinated group, Inferno never goes off. You could see that the Shadow Priest didn't trust me there, so I ended up silencing. Now, I don't know how silencers interact with this kick. You see Stitch takes that. The Shaman also took it because he didn't trust. Now, this bit's quite funny. I say I'm going to take this, but our Druid basically hops in and basically says that he wanted to be involved. Which is fine, because the mob was about to die. And Stitch's cooldown was off, but that was quite a funny moment. Our Druid was feeling left out. So, at this point we realise that we're below on percentage. We need about 68, 69%. So Stitch pulls the entire pack up to us and doesn't paralyze anything. So at this point, there's a lot of kicks and a lot of damage that we need to avoid. It gets a little bit hectic and a little bit scary. You can see that we try to stop the Bone Mender. A miscommunication there. I hodged the Sorcerer into Stitch's leg sweep. That meant that Stitch's leg sweep didn't get a lot of benefit, and I could have held my hodge to try and stop something else. It's also a good point to note that this is the kind of situation where running Blinding Light becomes effective, because it becomes a small interrupt for a great many number of these casts. So the Sorcerer and the Bone Mender there were just casting. If you used Blinding Light, you'd stop both casts. They'd immediately be broken out again and probably casting, but it would give you the couple of seconds for, say, that boomy beam to come down, or for my rebuke to come off cooldown. And you can kind of play. Now, you see, I'm focused here, so I instantly just leave. I try to snare, and I just get out of dodge. I do not want to be part of this. I'm backpedaling so I can still try and throw judgments and hodges, and kind of try and contribute to the DPS. But generally speaking, you just want to book it. You don't want to give them a time of day, really. Now, Stitch here is holding for the first set of ads. He's going to use the Anima Orb to essentially silence the casters so we deal with this first pack quickly. I've just popped all cooldowns and I am doing what I can as quickly as I can, single target, because Amarth is a bit of a pain. Now, obviously some of the ads have spawned, so swapping to the AoE rotation and trying to Divine Storm rather than Templar's Verdict. I'm still, however, trying to think of pumping as much damage into the boss as possible. Because end of the day, that's what I've been brought for. I'm using my racial as a blood elf to generate holy power during this single target rotation, because there's no debuffs that I need to remove. That is something that you're also going to have to decide how to use as a blood elf paladin. Because you can use your racial for DPS because it does generate a holy power, but you can also hold it to actively dispel certain debuffs if you know they're coming. Spires of Ascension is a prime example of it. Imbue Weapon from one of the mobs in there. I can't remember its name off the top of my head, but once you see that cast, if you Arcane Torrent immediately after that cast goes out, the debuff doesn't exist. Like, the buff that they get doesn't exist. They just stood there doing nothing for 3 seconds, no buff, they get no benefit out of it, and you've also just got a holy power. But you need to coordinate that. Generally, when we do Spires of Ascension keys, and I will try and record one for you, you will have myself, Stitch, Saito when he's with us, and the three of us will alternate our racials to try and get the most out of that. Now, this is where things start going south. This is a really bad pull on our end, hugely miscommunicated, because I tried to stop that kick. The shaman got it and I was out of position. Now, because I was the one that had aggro and I kicked it, it didn't move, which caused this particular pack to become really troublesome. You can see Stitch's necrotic stacks climbing really quickly. These things need to die and they're not grouped up enough. Now, this is where the miscommunication happened. I had Bop free, and I should have used it. But at the time, I didn't know Stitch had sorted that Cancel Aura macro out. So this pull ends up becoming a wipe, because our druid didn't have Trents at the time. So we didn't have a way to shift the aggro off Stitch enough for him to get his necrotic stacks off and to deal with Tenderize. So that's an example where Bop would have been perfect. I should have just went with my gut and bopped him. Because my concern at the time is, without having the threat with the threat removal component of Bop, and not knowing if you had a Cancel Aura, those mobs would have then just started clapping everybody else, and the healer was already behind. So we do a reset. It's fine. Stitch called it. That Ring Fluids was his kick. He marked it green. And I'm just going to town on the Corpse Collector to start. Just to get that out the way. And to try and minimize the amount of damage and kicks we need. So, just going through the rotation. There's nothing really to worry about at this point. Stitch can handle himself against 3 or 4 mobs. It's only when we try doing the really, really large pulls will a Brewmaster struggle. Especially when he's in a situation where Necrotic's going up, he's got high stagger, and he can't get rid of it. Because monks are fantastic at dealing with physical damage. They smooth it out. But because of the nature of stagger, even after a fight ends, they will continue taking damage until they've taken the full amount of damage that they were supposed to. But anyway, so we go into this pack. It's got a couple of crafters in. Throwing axes and stuff like that, so we get them to go through the mobs, and we try and avoid as much damage as we can. You can see that our shaman's targeted and ends up running behind me to then get it kited through the loyal creation. The loyal creation dies then before it does its stomp as a result. Now I'm targeted by Spiteful. Thankfully our druid roots it, but it's immediately broken out and I just kite. Now the Fleshcrafter tries to get a cast off. It does, and it's aimed at our druid. So our druid yeets his way over to Oros Cold Heart to try and get him targeted, but unfortunately the cleaver ends up hitting Stitch because Stitch was out of position. Now I sack our druid because he's the one constantly being targeted by the single target healing component of... Now, actually, we'll go back slightly, because this is a pretty big bat. Now, I sacked our druid because our healer seemed to be struggling with the single target healing component of the dungeon. Now, you can see how slowly it's taking him to get the Shadow Priest up after the Shadow Priest's taken damage. Now, you can see here Just go back a fraction. Our druid is really low on health now, and still has 3 seconds left of this thing. Now, I'm a great fan of mouse over macros and trying to be proactive as a paladin, and as a result I'm also running healing hands for lay on hands. So if I use lay on hands here, which I do, rather than having a 10-minute cooldown, it's a 3-minute cooldown ability. Now, you can get a lot of benefit out of this out of a dungeon and help healers. You just need to coordinate it with your healer. So you can see I mouse over, but unfortunately I was in a position that I got clapped. Now, being Kyrian, I used both my Kyrian vial and a normal health vial to instantly top myself back up to a reasonable health pool to reduce the amount of stress that the healer was taking. So I am doing everything I can as a hybrid class at this point to help the healer, because the healer has proven to struggle in places. Now, I don't know if that's just because it's shaman or that they, as a player, are or were trying to be more aggressive. Like, they pulled 2.1k DPS on that mob, so they were trying to be really aggressive, and that could have been partially due to the fact that they were really going for it, or it could have also been because I was using my defensives to help the group. And if you don't need to spam healing a druid that's at 10% health, then, because the paladins just laid it, then you can do more damage, perhaps. Or the fact that I used my health potions. It's like, oh, I don't need to heal him, he's already at full health. Fantastic. So we're now just going on to cleaning up the rest of this trash. Again, I'm focusing on the collector because it's kind of on its own and it won't really move to follow Stitch. The druid got the kick for the drained fluids because mine was on cooldown, and I'm just going and smacking it. So all my damage this pack was pretty much single target straight into that one mob, and I did more damage than the rest of the group did AoE. You can see that I'm targeted by a Spiteful, so I hand a hindrance it and just kite it out. Unfortunately, this week is very much a case of if you're melee and you get targeted, you're running out. You, like, at 16, 17 difficulty, these Spiteful Shades will kill you in maybe 2 to 3 hits, depending on your versatility and your armor. Now, both of these assistants throw cleavers, and we managed to get them to hit each other, which is fantastic. That's a really good start. Now, the morbid fixation that one of the assistants does can be bopped or bubbled. If it wasn't targeted on me, I could have bopped that individual, and you can stay there and you can just take it. You don't have to worry. Now, we're going through the rest of this fight. Now, I'm talking at this point that if I get targeted again, I will bubble. What I have failed to realise is forbearance. Now, I'm about to get targeted and I have 5 seconds left on it. To there. I still had forbearance at the time it smacked me. I could not do anything. We're discussing that, and then I quick recap, check to see how much it hit me for, and release. Because they are permanently in combat at this point until Stitch Flesh spawns. There is no time to resurrect me, and there's no point using a combat res that we may need for one of these two bosses, because Stitch Flesh and the Rhinebinder, Nalthor, are both relatively stressful fights and quite punishing if you make a mistake. So, I'm straight back up to the fight, and we just crack on. Not much to say here. I did get hit by that frontal cleave, so I believe I popped Shield of Vengeance. Yep, there it is. It pops. I get targeted by the Spiteful, so hand a hindrance, and try and just kite it from side to side, so I can still contribute some damage while making sure that it doesn't hit me. Now you see I dodged that gut slice. I'm paying attention. And that Spiteful's not on me, so I don't need to worry too much about it, and our druid's doing a fantastic job of rooting it. Now, I believe I pop... So, do I pop CDs or do I just hold? I think, actually looking at it, I just hold. Because we know after this pack we will be going on to Stitch Flesh. And at this point, we are discussing how we're going to do this. Now, we already know at this point that I am going to both spear and hammer. So we're trying to work out how else we're going to do this. Can we do it in 2 phases? And if we can, great, because we've got 8 minutes on the timer at this point, but we're also starting to get a little bit nervous, because if we wipe, this is out of time. Because we've made a few mistakes earlier with some unnecessary deaths, and generally, pulls haven't been as clean as we'd have liked. This is partially due to it being a pug group, but also partially due to rust on various people's ends. Like Stitch is picking up tank again for the first time this expansion. He's done a couple of tanking keys from here and there, but he's not at the same level he was in BFA. And I'm not accustomed to playing with a Brewmaster tank, because one thing that we were discussing very early on in this dungeon is threat. Now, at the end of this dungeon, I'll have a little discussion about threat and macros and things like that, just as a caveat. But if you guys want to see further guides on that, we will discuss that. Now, you can see I have a bit of a issue. I have to bubble to avoid threat there, and then I go straight into my single target damage, and I just try to pump as much as I can. Now, Morbid Fixation's on me. We managed to get him pulled, but I wasn't sure on the angle, so I just yeeted out, and we just continue the fight. Now, my DPS with the spear and hammer isn't great. Paladins are not really the class you want to be having a spear on. Unfortunately, though, I was the best option we had. Things, as you can see here, things are starting to get hairy. We have 2 creations, and we have Stitch Flesh out. We cannot afford this situation. These need to die now. Stitch is starting to get nervous. I'm starting to pump, and I'm doing everything I can. Like, my Final Reckoning comes off in 5, Execution Sentence comes off in 5, Divine Resonance comes off in 10, or Divine Toll comes off in 10. So we're just holding. We're holding. 26%. Another creation's about to come in. I sack Stitch prematurely. I vengeance. I am eking out as much damage as possible here. Now it's just single target. You can see that I completely ignore Divine Storming, and I go into the Templar's Verdicts. We need this single target damage. We need it to die. Stitch is starting to take an incredible amount of damage, and we just push. Stitch ends up coming in there tight with his Touch of Death. At this point, we're discussing that the Javelin only did 228,000 damage, sorry. A fraction of what it does for other classes such as Demon Hunters. Some Demon Hunters I've seen do these keys, the spear will do 800k. It'll do 4 times what mine did. But it's fine. We did it without a wipe. We've got 5 minutes to kill Rhinebinder. Now, Rhinebinder's an interesting one for Retribution Paladins, because that Frozen Binds debuff, you can actually pre-freedom. You can freedom it before it goes out. The problem is, however, as a singular Retribution Paladin, you have to do it frame perfect. Freedom will not come out in time. Every time. So you can see I pre-freedom myself there. And I now have 22 seconds of a cooldown. 17. And you'll see in the top left that the cast bar will come up with a cast shortly. So, Frozen Binds in 10. 8. And I've got 4 seconds left on freedom. So I should have it, but I miss it because mouse over, and I personally need faster reaction times to deal with who it's targeted on and knowing which party member is in which location. Thankfully, though, where Paladins, or where our strengths are, is this particular section. Some classes will struggle to 1v1 a Siphoner at higher difficulties. We don't. I am coming up with 3 stacks, which is lower than some other classes. Now, here's a problem. Comet Storm comes in and our Shadow Priest runs it directly into where I'm spawning. So the moment I land, I get hit with Comet Storm, instantly dying. Unfortunately, that meant that I also dropped a pool of ice in that location. Thankfully, because I'm a Retribution Paladin and I had less stacks than most other classes, the spot isn't that big. So we can play around it. We've got this. And we just keep going. Frozen Bind's coming in 7. I've got 5. It's coming in 4. And Freedom's just about to come off cooldown, and I miss it. Because Freedom was out by a second. So you need to, if you're going to get every single one, you need to get every single one. You cannot be late or miss. And you see our Shaman get hit a couple of times by those Comet Storms, but thankfully survives. Now, here's the thing. Our Druids come back up and has 5 stacks of this buff, or this debuff. So that I end up freedoming... Oh no, they shapeshifted out, sorry. And they had to park it right in the corner to give us space. Thankfully, the first one that was placed is now despawned. So we have space in the room again. But we're trying really, really hard to minimize the amount of space that this particular debuff goes up. That Shadow Priest is now at 4 stacks of the debuff coming back up. And I think it actually hits 5. So that's kind of the difference between the DPS. Like, we have a lot of single target damage, so we can slap that at. And the Shadow Priest actually comes up with 6 in the end. So the amount of space this Shadow Priest is about to take up is gonna be huge. I managed to pre-freedom them, so they got out in time, and it was still growing when the key ended. But, thankfully, we timed it. Didn't award any score for me, though, because I had previously timed a 16 Tyrannical Necrotic Wake in a previous week. The very, very first week. Thankfully. But that was because Stitch wasn't tanking and was in fact doing the weapons and spears on Stitch Flesh. Because monks are fantastic for that. So, to wrap up then. Overview of 16 Necrotic Wake, and yes, it was timed, but it wasn't by any means the cleanest of runs. Hopefully it has given you guys some insight and helped you guys with regards to how Retribution Paladin plays. I will put an example macro down below within the description on things like Blessing of Might and Blessing of Freedom. Not Blessing of Might. Blessing of Protection, sorry. I miss Blessing of Might. It kind of made us relevant. Buff monkeys! But anyway. I hope this video has helped. Please comment down below with something that you'd like to see in the next video, or if you have any questions for me. It'll be greatly appreciated, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, however, I wish you all the best. I hope you enjoy your Friday, whatever it is you're doing, wherever you are in the world, and I will catch you all in the next one. Catch you later, folks.